Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to my channel. I am Ben. Today, we step into a chilling mystery. An ordinary business partner suddenly vanished from a sand quarry camp, leaving behind only a locked door and a strange text message. What really happened in that isolated valley village, where the night swallowed a man whole? The river ran slow and brown past the hamlet, and the sand rose in pale dunes that shifted with every gust. On the morning of October 7th, 2013, a worried older brother stepped into a small police outpost in Hubei and said what families say when routine snaps. His younger brother had been gone for more than a week. There had been no calls, no texts, only a phone that rang into silence. In this part of rural China, the quarry by the river was as constant as sunrise engines, humming, belts squealing. Men with faces dusted the color of bone, and then a man who should have been there was not. His name was Neo Kuanghua, a 43-year-old businessman who moved fast, talked faster, and put real money into things that turned rocks and sand into cash. He had a habit he shared with his brother whenever one of them traveled. They would check in upon arrival. Before he vanished, he had mentioned plans to head to Yunnan for a class reunion during National Day, the October 1st holiday that opens a week-long rush locals call Golden Week. When families travel, schools close, and highways swell with cars. He never arrived. No one at the reunion saw him. The habit of checking in broke, and that was how the story started to feel wrong. Police did what they always do when a man with obligations disappears. They called the classmates. They called partners. They called the numbers in his phone. They found nothing. Then they walked outward from the obvious places, up the scrubbed slopes and down the loose banks, combing cliff edges, where missteps become tragedies. The river gave nothing back. The sand withheld its secrets. The quarry itself sat just off the water, a raw bite out of the landscape. It was not a beach, though at a glance the light could trick you. The same tawny expanse, the same shifting surface, the same heat that made everything shimmer. A makeshift camp stood nearby low tile roofs and thin walls that trapped the day's warmth. Foremen and stakeholders slept there when work ran late. The nearest homes were only 400 to 500 meters away, roughly a quarter to a third of a mile. So the quarry's people bumped into villagers every day, and news traveled by word of mouth. That is why it mattered when, one by one, the neighbors said they had not seen the boss for 8 or 9 days. His stake in the place had not been small. 2 years earlier, he and several others had pooled capital, roughly 600,000 yuan in total. And because he had put in more than half, the crew had taken to calling him the boss. The hamlet itself pinched inward at its entrance, a single narrow road threading between hills. There was only one way in and one way out, a funnel that kept track of comings and goings, even when no one was looking. On the afternoon of the 29th, according to a partner named Dui Quang Kiem, the victim had spent hours under the sun tinkering with a stubborn excavator. It was the sort of job you avoided hiring out when you lived where the road in was narrow and long. By late afternoon, the machine thumped to life, and the boss walked off first. Around early evening, Doi left for the village for a family birthday dinner. That small detail would matter later: who was at the quarry camp and who was not. There was also a message. At 6:22 in the evening on National Day, October 1st, a text landed on the phone from the missing man's number. The words sounded like a man walking away from responsibility, telling a colleague to make decisions without him, and hinting darkly that a certain woman could not be trusted. It was the kind of message that breeds more questions than it answers. If you are the biggest investor at a site, You do not vanish by text. You call, you meet, you sit across a table and you argue. You do not surrender control with a few curt lines unless someone else is holding your phone. The woman alluded to was the quarry's accountant, Jung Diu-gum. She had studied accounting, kept the books, and held a shareholder's slice. The evening before the man vanished, she had cooked for him at her home because the camp's cook had taken the night off and he disliked instant noodles. She said he ate, thanked her, and left. She also said there was nothing between them beyond work. In a place where neighbors share a courtyard and older parents sit just beyond a thin wall, discretion is practical as much as moral. She kept the door open while he ate. Still, the timing drew attention because of what came next. Her husband, usually away in Guangdong, returned home at 6 in the morning on the 30th, then left again after only 2 days of a holiday that normally ran 7. Golden Week is the time when people settle in, cook, visit, breathe. Cutting it short made the police lean in. Police did what good investigators do. They looked for the person who watched without being watched. They found a man named Liu, whose house faced the small road toward the river. On the night of the 29th, he had taken his 4-year-old son to the primary school's courtyard to watch older kids practice hip-hop moves, a summer-autumn ritual that lights up small towns after dinner. He remembered the missing man passing by. Head down, moving toward the quarry. They exchanged a nod, not words. It was sometime around 8 or maybe 8:30. Memory is blunt and honest like that. Precise enough to point you in the right direction, not sharp enough to cut a timeline clean. The camp's layout was simple. An office kept papers and stamps. 2 rooms for the major stakeholders sat beside it. Workers slept bunk-style further off. When Durr returned from a long night of mahjong near dawn, around 4 in the morning, he noticed something odd. The missing man's door was locked from the outside. In the mountains, at that hour, it is still dark, still cold, and the dew clings to everything. If the man had come back to sleep, the lock should have been opened from within. If he had never returned, then who had locked it? Inside the buildings, police found no blood, no scuffs, no broken signs that usually cling to violence. Outside, the quarry posed a different problem. Sand is a living surface. It takes a mark, softens it, and then swallows it with the next pass of a truck. A week of work is an eraser that never tires. Still, near the camp, about 20 meters from the living quarters, roughly 65 feet, they found what can survive even in sand. If you look closely, the ghost of a tread. It did not belong to the heavy dump trucks that shuttled bulk material. Those beasts leave wide, deep bites. This pattern had 6 ribs and a narrower footprint. The track-to-track distance measured around 142 centimeters, and each tire face ran about 12 centimeters across, roughly 5 inches. Someone had driven a small lorry in from the direction of the ravine, idled within sight of the camp, then turned around and left the way they had come. If you only needed to turn around, you would do it on the wide national road, not down a cramped dirt lane you cannot even see from the highway. Whoever drove in had a reason to be there. In any county town, you can find hundreds of small lorries that look the same. Tires are common, wheels fool you. But the quarrymen noticed something else. In recent weeks, almost no small lorries had reason to enter the site. Big trucks did the hauling. The little ones made sense for small jobs, for bagged grain or supplies, not for bulk sand. The print's freshness placed the visit within roughly 10 days. That window overlapped perfectly with the days the boss vanished. The text message also started to read differently. When set against the tread, if the missing man typed it, then he was alive on October 1st. If someone else held the phone, the message was not information, it was camouflage. Its tone about the accountant, those pointed, needless barbs, felt like spite more than business. To write a sentence like that, you had to know the quarry's politics. Who invested what? Who argued with whom? Who resented whom? The pool of people that informed narrowed to those who lived inside the circle. There were other coincidences you could not ignore. The partner who was almost always at the Camp Dury happened to be gone that night. The accountant's husband came home and left in an odd rhythm for a holiday that encourages lingering, and then there was a third shareholder with a complicated history at the site, a man whose family owned a small lorry, the kind that carried grain from a warehouse behind his in-laws' home. People in the hamlet knew the last 3 digits of that license plate, the way small towns remember the smell of their own kitchens. When police knocked on doors and asked the simple question, who drives what? Who goes where after dark? The answers circled back to the same names. Someone tried not to mention the small lorry at all, which is the sort of omission that makes detectives put a red mark by your name. Machines do not have motives, but the people behind their wheels do. In the days after the tread was found, the investigation shifted from searching the river to tracing a route a small lorry might take on a hard, rutted lane at night. It would not be long before that route ran straight toward a family warehouse and a door whose inner hinge still held a smear the color of rust. And if a smear could be blood, then a text could be a mask, and a week could be just enough time for sand to settle over a crime, not erase it. The quarry was finally giving something back quietly, in the pattern of rubber and the choices of men. By the end of the first week, the case had shed one easy storyline. He had not run from debt. His accounts were clean, his deals solvent, and there was nothing in his books that hinted at a man on the brink. In a small county where rumor moves faster than official memos that mattered, it meant the disappearance of Nie Quang Hua was not convenience or cowardice. It was the kind of silence that arrives from outside a man's will. The investigators did what method demands. They sat down with the people who had skin in the pit, 4 partners who had sunk money, time, and pride into a riverside sand operation. The first was Doi Quang Kiam, almost 30% in, almost always on site. The sort who could tell if an engine was hurt just by the way a belt sang. He said the last time he saw the boss was late afternoon on the 29th. The excavator had coughed and stalled. He and the boss had spent hours under a white sun coaxing it back. The road to the hamlet was narrow and long, a single rutted artery, and bringing in outside mechanics took too much money and too much patience. So they had done what men away from cities do, learned enough to fix the small things themselves. Around 5 in the afternoon, the machine finally woke. The boss walked off first. Near 7 in the evening, Doe set out for a relative's birthday in the village. He did not see the boss again. Morning stripped the celebration from the air and left work. The sand pump sulked. Out of habit, Durr went to find the boss. 2 men could lift and bend a problem faster than one. The door to the boss's room at the camp was locked from the outside. He waited. He asked around. The phone went straight to nothing. That was the beginning of a worry that had edges. 2 days later, on National Day, at 6:22 in the evening, a message arrived on Durai's phone from the missing man's number. The phrasing was clipped and cold. A shrug typed into glass. He was going away to make money. Someone else should make the decisions. And a certain woman was not to be trusted. It read less like a plan than a posture. If you hold the largest stake at a site, and have spent seasons grinding the operation into profit. You do not surrender stewardship by text. You call a meeting. You raise your voice. You do not insult an accountant in passing and vanish into a holiday crowd, unless the insult is bait laid by a hand that is not yours. They followed the barb to its target. The woman was the site's bookkeeper. Chuang Diokam, trained in accounting, a shareholder, the keeper of ledgers and stamps. The night before the man disappeared, she had cooked dinner for him at her home. The cook at the camp had taken the evening off, and the boss disliked instant noodles. She told the police she kept the door open while he ate. Her parents lived next door. 2 houses, 1 shared courtyard. In a place like that, modesty was more than morality. It was architecture. She said he thanked her and left. There was, she insisted, nothing beyond work. But the holiday made her household's rhythm stand out. Her husband, usually away working in Guangdong, returned at 6 in the morning on the 30th, stayed only 2 days of a week-long Golden Week, then left again in haste. Golden Week is designed for lingering. Families cook, markets fatten, schools sleep. Cutting it short is a note in the margin that begs for an arrow. The mother confirmed a key detail, the kind a mother remembers because she watches her daughter's doorway. The boss had walked out of that house around 8 in the evening on the 29th, toward the small road that ran to the sand. If the husband returned at dawn the next day, the times did not overlap. The mother also explained the abrupt departure. A colleague had been injured in an accident back at the plant. The company called him to cover the shift. The call could be verified, and it was. Coincidence is not always conspiracy, but it never fails to slow investigators down enough to measure. The police looked for eyes not invested in anyone's reputation. They found a man named Liu, who lived across from the schoolyard. On warm nights after dinner, older kids practiced hip-hop in the open, a late summer ritual that put music into the dark and pulled adults out onto stoops. He had taken his 4-year-old to watch. He remembered the boss passing by, head down, walking toward the quarry, and returning a nod. It was about 8 or maybe 8:30. The memory fit perfectly beneath the mother's account, like 2 boards that did not even need nails. The route made sense. The hour made sense. The vanishing act did not. The camp itself was spare and practical. An office held paperwork. 2 rooms for the major partners sat beside it. Workers slept in a shared space farther off. At around 4 in the morning, after a long, bitter night of mahjong, born from a birthday argument, Dai returned. The door to the boss's room was still locked from outside. Up in the hills at that hour, the cold is thin and alert. Dew sits on every hinge and handle. If the man had come home late, the lock should have been thrown from within. If he had never returned, then the question was uglier. Who had locked it, and why? There were no bloodstains inside. No scuffs dragged across tile. The tidy quiet of the rooms felt like a dare. From the police station's white desks, the case looked like a straight line. A man leaves dinner around 8, is seen walking toward a place he sleeps, and then evaporates. But nothing about the way he worked, invested, or argued suggested a man who would abandon a site he controlled with more than half the capital. The math of the message clashed with the math of the business. The tone about the accountant unnecessary. Needling sounded personal, not professional. Whoever wrote it knew the coalition's internal weather. The pool of people who could have composed it shrank to those who breathed the pit's dust. So the investigators turned from water and hills to people and motive. Who knew the boss had likely returned to the camp after dinner? Who knew so often the other set of hands and eyes would not be there that night? The birthday guest list was short. The village's attention was precise. One partner had been gone. One partner's wife had opened her door to the boss to feed him and had a husband in and out within 48 hours for reasons that, at least on paper, checked out. And there was a third shareholder with a complicated history at the site, a man who had once held the reins and now gripped them only by percentage and resentment. People in a hamlet learned to recognize vehicles by their voices and their last three numbers. That kind of memory was about to matter. For now, the board showed this. A disappearance carved into the space between 8 in the evening and 4 in the morning. A door locked the wrong way. A text that read like a mask. A woman who cooked opened her door and swore there was nothing else. A husband who came and left against the holiday's grain, but with a reason his company could confirm. And a witness who watched dance steps in a courtyard and saw a man walk toward a camp that did not hold him. Come dawn, the sand still kept its secrets, but the circle of people big enough to hide a secret that size was shrinking by the hour. The tread lived where sand was supposed to forget. It lay like a faint scar, about 20 meters from the camp, roughly 65 feet, 6 ribs pressed into the earth, narrow where the quarry's usual monsters were wide. The investigators measured in the heat and wrote the numbers down in pencil that sweated, a track-to-track span near 142 centimeters, each tire face about 12 centimeters, near 5 inches across. The imprint turned in, idled within sight of the tiled roofs, then swung around and climbed back out the way it had come. If you were only looking to spin your vehicle, you would choose the national road, where the width forgives mistakes. You would not creep down a dirt lane no one on the highway could even see. Whoever came here came with purpose. In a county like this, small lorries are as common as summer cicadas. Their voices blur, their tires share the same ribs. That was the problem, and also the answer. In the weeks before the disappearance, almost no small lorries had any reason to enter the pit. Big trucks hauled bulk. The little ones good for bagged grain, tools, errands had no place in a site that moved mountains by the ton. The freshness of the tread put its visit inside roughly 10 days. That window was the same window in which a man with more than half the investment vanished between an evening walk and a locked door. So they went back to people. Because tires do not lie, but they do not talk. They started with Doi Kwang Kim again, the partner who was nearly always present, and the one whose phone received that strange message at 6:22 in the evening on National Day. He repeated his path like a confession, said twice to be sure. Late afternoon, on the 29th, fixing the excavator, early evening off, to a birthday dinner, then hours of mahjong and a cold walk, back near 4 in the morning, to find the boss's door locked from the outside. The text, clipped and cynical, told him to take charge and not to trust the accountant. The words looked less like a decision and more like bait, a handful of sentences designed to bruise one person and distract the rest. Follow the bruise to the skin and you reach the accountant. Jung Tiokam. Her mother swore the man left at around 8 in the evening on the 29th and that the door to her daughter's house had stayed open out of modesty and caution. Her husband, a factory worker in Guangdong, had come home at 6 in the morning on the 30th and left only 2 days later because a colleague was injured. The company called him back. The call was real. The reason checked out. Coincidence slows a cop. It does not stop one. The rhythm of that household still pressed oddly against a holiday made for lingering. The witness across from the schoolyard filled a seam in the night. On warm evenings, older children practiced hip-hop moves under the open sky. a late summer ritual that put music into the dusk. He had taken his 4-year-old out to watch and remembered the boss pass by, head down, toward the river road somewhere around 8 or 8:30. That placed the missing man between the accountant's doorway and the camp, on foot, with the path and the time aligned. Everything pointed back to the quarry. Everything except a body. Sand swallows most stories, but not all of them. The tread gave the investigators something that could be weighed and matched. They walked the hamlet, asking small questions with heavy answers. Who owns what? Who borrows from whom? Who drives late? Who knows when the camp is empty? The answers kept circling a name the pit knew well. Ngu Tongbin. He had been there from the beginning. A former operator whose family kept a warehouse and a small lorry for grain. He told the police he had no car, only a motorcycle in small places. Lies are never lonely. Villagers volunteered the last 3 numbers of a plate they had seen for years. 313, and said the lorry belonged to his in-laws. It was the kind of detail you cannot purchase once the asking starts. They found the truck inside the in-laws' yard and brought in the trace team. If a week of work is an eraser, the hinges of a driver's door are a notebook few people think to clean. Near the edge, where metal meets metal, on the inner seam only visible when the door yawns open, a dark smear clung and flaked. Not a spray, not a spatter, but a drag. As if something wet had brushed past in the wrong kind of hurry. Swabs went into labeled envelopes. Family blood went into other envelopes for the comparison the law demands. The match came back with the quiet certainty that ends speculation. The blood belonged to Nieo Quanghua. A man can lend a car. He does not lend his blood. Now the text read like a mask, the tread like a footprint across a shallow stream. The investigators pressed into the timeline between the birthday dinner and the dawn. The quarry's regular second pair of hands, Duri, was away for once. The camp was thinly staffed on the holiday's first night. The lorry had come in from the ravine side, idled within view of the rooms, and turned around. If a body had to be moved, this was the hour, and this was the lane that could bear the weight without eyes on it. They asked Ngui again about that night. He said after the birthday meal, he and his wife left early and went to his in-laws. Later, he claimed, he returned to fetch the lorry for grain. His in-laws remembered the oddness more than the hour. Supplies at the shop were still sufficient. The road from the warehouse to the village was rutted and dark. People moved grain by daylight because daylight sees you through the holes. Night was for secrets and for making the same road feel longer. Motive is the tool you reach for once you have a route, a stain, and a name. Money cuts cleanest. Years earlier, the site had been faltering. Old machines coughed. Customers thinned. When fresh capital arrived, the new boss, backed by more than half the money, took control, stabilized operations, and turned losses into profit. Resentment does not need poverty to grow. It only needs the feeling that someone else holds the ledger and the stamp. According to the grumbling that bled through interviews, decisions ran through a tight triangle. The big investor, the fixer who was always present, and the accountant who kept the books. If that triangle locked others out, the sand could choke on envy as easily as on dust. The detectives laid the pieces out on a desk. A message that insulted the accountant and attempted to authorize a retreat. A tread that did not belong to the quarry's heavy trucks. A partner missing during the crucial hours. A suspect who denied he had access to a lorry the village heard by sound and recognized by numbers. A smear on a hinge that matched the missing man's blood. Put them in any order you like. The picture stayed the same. When arrested, we tried silence first. Silence is a riverbank. Pressure is water. On October 12th, 14 days after the man vanished. He talked, he pointed. He walked officers to the edge of the pit where he said the first blow fell. He led them into scrubby trees where he had thrown a SIM card and a phone. He brought them behind the in-laws' warehouse to a patch of ground that sounded dull when a shovel bit it. Beneath it lay a man already returning to the earth. The DNA said what the tread and the hinge had already whispered. In his telling, anger wore the mask of fairness. He spoke of money locked behind other people's signatures, of profits that felt like breath passing someone else's lips, of a partnership he could not exit without paying a price he did not have. He accused the big investor of arrogance and the inner circle of cooking books he was not allowed to read. Perhaps some of that was true. None of it explained a body in the ground, a smear on a door, and a message sent to smear a woman's name. The pit that swallowed footprints had finally given back a path, and on it stood a man who had believed the night, and the sand would do his erasing for him. They had not. The village held its breath after dark. Doors clicked shut around 9:30 or 10, and the only sound was the river and the occasional motor humming past the primary school. On the road that fell away toward the quarry camp, a man named Liu stood with his 4-year-old son and watched teenagers practice hip-hop in the courtyard. A late summer ritual that turned dusk into a thin, friendly stage. He remembered a man pass by with his head lowered, moving toward the sand. Liu lifted a hand in greeting. The man nodded back without breaking stride. That was sometime around 8, perhaps 8:30. Later, when he leaned on memory to give the police a time, he said he had arrived home around 9. The small facts lined up like stones across a stream. They pointed in one direction. They pointed back to the camp. The camp sat less than half a kilometer from the nearest houses, roughly a quarter to a third of a mile. It was a straight shot along a dirt lane that narrowed between low roofs and drying racks. On ordinary nights, several workers slept there, men who had learned the economy of shared rooms and thin mattresses. That night was not ordinary. It pressed right up against the National Day holiday, when some went home, some went out, and some, like the partner who fixed machines and watched ledgers, went to a relative's birthday. By late evening on the 29th, only one person was supposed to be on duty. Then even he was gone. When he returned near 4 in the morning, cold dew on the hinges, the door to the boss's room was locked from the outside. That single detail set the tone for everything that followed. The search began where most disappearances end, in the rooms themselves. No blood, no scuffs on tile, no hair caught in a hinge. The quiet inside felt curated, as if violence had chosen to walk somewhere else, outside. The quarry swallowed clues as a matter of business. Sand is a living surface. It takes a mark, blurs it, and carries it away beneath 1,000 rubber bites. A week of trucks will erase a footprint the way tide erases a line of shells. If anything remained, it would be the sort of thing that hides in plain sight and survives because no one thinks to look. The phone records told a parallel story, the kind that moves in exact times. The last call the missing man answered came at 5:36 in the evening on the 29th from the quarry's accountant. It lasted only seconds, an invitation to return and eat once dinner was ready, she said. The next communication only appeared 2 days later, at 6:22 in the evening, on National Day. A clipped text that read like a man stepping away from his own investment, telling a partner to make decisions without him, shading the accountant with a needless barb. It was a message that seemed crafted to answer questions before anyone asked them. It was also the sort of message someone else could send with a stolen phone. Investigators widened the circle through the village. working outward from the accountant's door to the camp, and then to the dirt tracks that stitched the site to the national road. A locked door at dawn suggested two possibilities. Either the missing man had not come back at all, or he had returned and left again in the dead middle of the night. No calls came to his phone after dinner. No meeting was arranged. If he left, he did not leave to meet anyone. That narrowed the night into something uglier, either accident or attack. Within the space the quarry controlled, the sand finally yielded an answer. Faint, but legible. The ghost of a tread about 20 meters from the living quarters, roughly 65 feet pressed into earth, that should have forgotten. It was not the wide, deep signature of the quarry's heavy trucks. This pattern had 6 ribs and a narrow face. The distance from track to track measured near 142 centimeters. Each tire's contact patch ran around 12 centimeters, about 5 inches across. The route was a loop. Enter from the ravine side, idle within sight of the rooms. Turn around. Leave the way you came. If you only wanted to swing your vehicle around, you would do it on the wide national road. You would not creep down a lane hidden from the highway and risk getting stuck. Someone came into the camp for a reason. Someone came to meet a person who could no longer answer his phone. The quarrymen told the police what the landscape already implied. In recent weeks, almost no small lorries had any business inside the pit. Bulk sand moved on big haulers. Small lorries were for errands, bagged grain, tools, supplies, and rarely rolled their narrow ribs onto quarry ground. The freshness of the imprint placed the visit within roughly 10 days, a window that sat directly over the night the man vanished. The tread was a flag planted in the middle of the story. It said, "Look for the driver whose errands take him past midnight." The route analysis carried its own logic. The camp lay about 200 meters off the national road, roughly 650 feet down a narrow lane. No passing motorist could even see well enough to choose it as a safe place to swing around. That ruled out the innocent explanation. This was not a wrong turn. It was not a cautious driver seeking a wider shoulder. It was intent, laid out in rubber. From there, the case returned to people. The partner who usually stayed on site admitted he had left around 7 in the evening for his brother's birthday, argued about over-salty dishes, played mahjong, until near dawn, and only then returned to find the wrong lock thrown on the boss's door. The accountant repeated that the boss had arrived, waited while she cooked, stepped out to buy cigarettes, returned to eat, then thanked her and left around 8. Her mother, who shared a courtyard with her, confirmed she had watched him walk out toward the small road that led to the sand. The husband's sudden 2-day visit from faraway Guangdong during a 7-day holiday still felt wrong. But the factory's callback after a colleague's accident was real and verified. Coincidence slows. It does not stop. The tread pushed the questions toward a narrow class of vehicles. Small lorries numbered in the hundreds across the county. But the ones that approached the quarry at night were far fewer. People in hamlets recognized their own machines the way they recognize voices. By the rattle in the engine, by the lay of a bumper, by the last 3 digits of a plate. When officers asked who owned which vehicle, who borrowed from whom, and who drove late, the answers began to lean toward the family that kept a grain warehouse near the in-laws' yard. The man who used that small lorry denied having a car at all, said he rode a motorcycle. Denial in a place this small is a stone thrown into still water. The ripples quickly find a shore. Villagers volunteered what everyone already knew. The small lorry existed. It had a familiar 3-digit tail. The driver used it not only for grain, but sometimes for his own errands. And recently, someone had seen it move late. If the tread was the quarry's whisper, The phone history was its echo. The last answered call and the last sent text straddled the night and the holiday, like bookends, one from the accountant's doorway, near dusk, one sent 2 days later, that sounded like staged indifference, side by side with a door locked from the outside and a small lorry loop into the camp. Those bookends read as a script: dinner, departure, return to the camp, an encounter in the dark, a body that did not walk itself away, and a message sent to make a partner stop asking questions. The sand could not keep that story buried. It had already started to speak in numbers, in distances, in timing exact enough to cut through lies. The investigators now had a path to follow: measure tires, list small lorries, test the easy lies first. They would step from the faint ribs in the soil to the families who kept grain and moved it by daylight, to the drivers who had reasons to know when the camp was empty, to the vehicles that could wander down a hidden lane at night and turn around within sight of a sleeping room. Somewhere along that path, rubber would meet blood, and intent would stop pretending to be coincidence. For the first time since the older brother had walked into the police post on October 7th, the case felt less like fog and more like a road. It began at the accountant's door, ran through the witness at the schoolyard, brushed a lock at 4 in the morning, looped once in the sand, and pointed away into the dark, where a small lorry's taillights would have looked like 2 red coins sinking into the trees. The search team fanned out from the camp like a comb dragged through coarse hair. They worked the riverbank, the scrub, the game trails, the rutted lane that fell away from the national road, and then they circled back. Because if a man had vanished between a meal and dawn, the answer would sit where routine lived. A week of trucks had scuffed and pressed the ground until it forgot. But investigators stayed with the stubborn faith of people who have nothing else left to do. If the room gave nothing, the sand might still whisper. Sand is a living surface. It accepts a mark, blurs it, and swallows it beneath 1,000 rubber bites. Inside the rooms, no blood, no scuffs, no hair in hinges. Outside, the quarry's daily eraser, still just beyond the tiled roofs about 20 meters away. In roughly 65 feet, the earth held the faint ghost of a tread. 6 ribs, a narrow face, a track-to-track span near 142 centimeters, each tire's contact patch around 12 centimeters, about 5 inches. The print curved in from the ravine side, idled where a man could see the lamps from his bed, then turned and left by the same seam of earth it had used to enter. You do not choose a hidden dirt lane 200 meters off the highway, roughly 650 feet, to perform a harmless U-turn. You do that on the wide shoulder of the national road. Whoever came in that night came with intent. Locals know the difference between work and noise. Big haulers move the quarry's bulk, small lorries good for bagged grain, and errands had almost no reason to push their narrow ribs onto quarry ground in recent weeks. That was not opinion. It was the pattern of the place, recited by men who slept there and woke to machine noise. The freshness of the impression placed the visit within roughly 10 days. The same window the boss slid from the world between an evening walk and a locked door. The tread was not a story by itself. It was an arrow. Follow it. The case had already taught detectives to respect small facts. At around 8 in the evening, on the 29th, perhaps 8:30, a man named Liu stood with his 4-year-old son by the primary school courtyard, watching teenagers practice hip-hop beneath late summer skies. He remembered the boss pass by, head down, nod returned, feet set toward the camp. He went home around 9. The timings nested together the way true things do. Doorways, roads, habits, They all pushed the man back toward the camp before the night snapped. Inside the camp, the geometry was simple: an office for ledgers and stamps, 2 rooms for major partners, a shared bunk room farther off. The partner, who was usually the second pair of hands, Dory, had left near 7 that evening for his brother's birthday meal, argued over salty dishes, bled off the mood with hours of mahjong, and only returned near 4 in the morning. The boss's door was locked from the outside. Up in the hills at that hour, it was still dark, still cold, dew thick on every hinge. If the man had come home late, the lock should have been thrown from within. If he had not, then someone else had thrown it. The tread outside gave that someone a shape on rubber. Phone history bookended the night. The last call he answered 5:36 in the afternoon on the 29th came from the site's accountant. A quick ring to tell him to come eat when dinner was ready. 2 days later, at 6:22 in the evening on National Day, a text left his phone and landed on their eyes. A clipped, bloodless message about going away to make money, telling the partner to make decisions, and needlessly smearing the accountant's name. You do not abandon more than half the capital you control with a handful of lines like that. If you want out, you meet, you argue, you count. If a text reads like a staged exit and an unearned insult, someone may be using a phone as camouflage. 2 hypotheses grew from those bookends. First, that the missing man had typed the message himself and was alive on October 1st. Second, that a different hand sent it to tidy up questions and redirect suspicion. The second demanded proximity. To bait colleagues with a barb about the accountant, you had to know the quarry's inner weather, who held which percentages, who had argued, who resented whom. That meant a small circle, the people who breathed dust together. Then there was the awkward rhythm of the accountant's household against a holiday built for lingering. Her husband, usually working in Guangdong, came home at 6 in the morning on the 30th, stayed 2 days of a 7-day golden week, and left again after a colleague's traffic accident forced a callback, an explanation the company confirmed. Coincidence slows a cop. It does not stop one. The mother's eyes, those careful village eyes, supplied an anchor. The boss had walked out of her daughter's door around 8 on the night of the 29th, headed toward the small road that ran to the sand. Times did not overlap. The husband did not cross the man's path. The texts poisoned. Those jabs about the accountant looked even more like camouflage than truth. The tread narrowed the vehicle class. The village narrowed the list of drivers. In a county, you can count hundreds of small lorries, but in a hamlet, you count the ones that matter on one hand. People know machines the way they know voices, by a rattle in the engine, the tilt of a bumper, the last 3 numbers on a plate. When officers asked, who owns what? Who borrows from whom? Who drives late? The answers began to lean toward families who kept grain in a warehouse and sometimes moved it after dark. None of that, by itself, proved a crime. It just made the lane look less like a mistake and more like a plan. Even the innocent reading of the route started to fail under scrutiny. If a careful driver wanted only to swing around, the national road was wide and forgiving. The camp's lane was narrow, hidden, and lay 200 meters off the highway. A bad place to practice uncertainty. A good place to meet someone who could not answer his phone. The loop in and out drew itself. Enter from the ravine, idle, within sight of sleeping rooms. Turn, leave. It was a handwriting sample in rubber. As speculation coiled through the hamlet, one more coincidence drew a thin red line in the detective's notebook. Of all nights, the partner who almost always slept on site was away that night. He was invited to the birthday. He argued. He played. He came back to find the lock set wrong. That is possible. That can also be useful to someone who knows your schedule. If you were planning to move a body or stage a disappearance, the first night of a holiday when workers scatter, and the second set of eyes is gone, would be the night to choose. But cases do not close on coincidence. They close on routes you can walk and marks you can measure. So the investigators made a simple plan that felt like a tightening net. List the small lorries, measure their tires, test easy lies first, trace who knew the camp would be thinly staffed, and keep the text and tread next to each other on the same desk. Because messages can be masks, and rubber can be signature. Somewhere along that path, intent would stop pretending to be chance. And for the first time since an older brother stood in a police outpost on October 7th, the case felt less like fog and more like a road you could take in the dark without getting lost. The suspicion that settled on the pit did not choose a single man at first. It moved like fog between names. One evening of absence stood out. The partner who almost never left, the one who fixed belts by ear and signed for deliveries, had been gone on the very night when a man with more than half the capital seemed to vanish between a meal and dawn. In a place where coincidence often wears someone's fingerprints, that was enough to make the village murmur. Was a birthday an alibi or a stage prop? The question hung over the tiles like cold breath. Interviews circled back through the same narrow lane of facts. On the afternoon of the 29th, the boss and the fixer had coaxed a sputtering excavator back to life under a white sun. Around 7 in the evening, the fixer walked into the village for his younger brother's birthday meal, argued about over-salty dishes, drowned the mood with hours of mahjong, and returned near 4 in the morning. At that dark hour, dew sat thick on hinges. The door to the boss's room was locked from the outside. Between those bookends lay a sighting at the schoolyard, sometime around 8, perhaps 8:30, of the boss walking toward the river road. Head down. A nod given and returned. The story's shape could be traced with a finger. It always ran back to the camp. The phone told its own dry truths. The last answered call came at 5:36 in the late afternoon on the 29th from the accountant who shared ledgers and stamps. She said she phoned only to call him back to dinner once the rice steamed and the walk went quiet. 2 evenings later, at 6:22 on National Day, a text crawled out of the missing man's number and onto the fixer's phone. A clipped message about going away to make money, about letting someone else decide, with an unnecessary barb that named no one and obviously meant one person. If messages can be masks, this one fit too well. It knew what to insult. It knew whom to free of responsibility. It knew the shape of a partnership that had argued itself into profit. The accountant's house, with its 2 separate dwellings around a shared courtyard, kept its own clock. Her mother watched doorways like sentries watch walls. She said the boss had left around 8 that night, stepping toward the lane that dropped to the sand. Her son-in-law, a factory worker who lived and worked far to the south, had arrived at 6 in the morning on the 30th, stayed 2 days of a 7-day holiday, and left again because a colleague had been injured. The factory called him back. The call existed. The colleague's injury existed. Coincidence slowed the detectives long enough to measure it, then let them walk on. If rooms refused to speak, the ground sometimes whispered. About 20 meters, roughly 65 feet from the low tile roofs, the ghost of a tread lay where sand should have forgotten. It was not the quarry's usual handwriting, not the wide, deep signatures of dump trucks. 6 ribs, a narrow face, a track-to-track span near 142 centimeters. Each contact patch around 12 centimeters, about 5 inches across. The loop was clear. Enter from the ravine. Idle within sight of sleeping rooms. Swing around. and leave along the same thin seam of earth. A driver who only wanted to turn would have done it on the wide national road. This was intent cast in rubber. Intent demanded a driver. The county held hundreds of small lorries' engines that sounded alike, tires that wore the same ribs. But the hamlet held far fewer that would nose down a hidden lane at night. Men who slept at the camp said what the landscape already implied. In recent weeks, almost no small lorries had business inside the pit. Bulk sand rode on big haulers. Errands rode on daylight. The freshness of the impression placed the visit within roughly 10 days. Inside the same window that swallowed the boss between an evening walk and a locked door, they returned to the birthday house and walked the guest list with the care of men reading legal text. The fixer had left early. So had a shareholder whose family kept a grain warehouse and a small lorry with a familiar 3-digit tail. He told officers he had no car, only a motorcycle. In small places, lies are never alone. Villagers named the lorry's last 3 digits the way you remember the smell of your own kitchen. They said the vehicle belonged to the in-laws, that the man sometimes drove it for grain and sometimes for himself. And lately, someone had heard it move late. Trace work is patient work. Officers followed the whisper to a courtyard where a small lorry idled beneath dust. The tires wore 6 ribs. The face measured near 12 centimeters. The track width matched the notebook figures scratched at the pit. Inside the hinge seam of the driver's door, visible only when the door opened wide, something dark had dried in a drag. Not a spray, a smear, the color of rust. Swabs went into envelopes. Family blood went into others. A lab's soft verdict stitched the story shut by one thread. The smear matched the missing man. A vehicle can be borrowed. A man's blood cannot. The text now read like theater. The tread read like a footprint across a shallow stream. The locked door at 4 in the morning read like a hand reaching back to neaten the scene. The detectives pushed on the thin hours between 8 in the evening and dawn, hours when the camp had thinned for a holiday, when the fixer was away, when a small lorry could creep down a lane no passing motorist would ever choose as a place to turn. They asked the shareholder again. He said he and his wife had left the birthday early, visited the in-laws, then later fetched the lorry to move grain. Supplies were not low. The road was rutted and dark. People moved grain by daylight, so the holes could not lie to them. The answer did not fit the habit. It fit the hour. Motive sits at the end of the road. You can already walk. Money had rearranged the pit 2 years earlier. New capital had taken control and wrapped losses into profit. Resentment only needs a ledger and a locked stamp to grow. The inner weather of the partnership was known to anyone who breathed its dust. A big investor who signed, a fixer who stayed, an accountant who kept the books, and others who felt pushed to the edges of their own venture. The text's needless stab at the accountant said more about spite than about governance. The writer knew who would bruise. Pressure turned silence into speech. On a gray morning, 12 days after the night by the river, the shareholder who had denied a car spoke. He pointed with a finger that had run out of places to hide. He walked officers to the edge of the pit, where he said the first blow fell. He took them into scrub, where a SIM card and a phone had been thrown like flat stones. He led them behind the in-laws' warehouse, to ground that rang dull under a shovel. In the soil lay a body the sand could not erase. The lab's quiet matched the hinge's quiet. The man whose phone had sent a mask of a message could not read it anymore. The reconstruction that followed was the sort detectives recite in court. The boss had eaten at the accountant's, thanked her, and left around 8. He had walked toward the camp, Someone who knew the holiday's thin staffing and the fixer's rare absence waited. The encounter happened not inside a room that would talk, but outside, on ground that could be swept every hour by work itself. A small lorry rolled in from the ravine, idled within sight of tile roofs, took on a burden that could not walk, turned itself around, and climbed back out along the same seam it came in on. Later, a message was typed to grant a partner authority he already held, to smear a woman in a way that would suck up attention, and to pretend a retreat that the man who supposedly chose it would never have made by text. The sand had tried to swallow the story. Numbers, distances, and a smear the color of rust made it spit the story back. The village exhaled in the way small places do when a mystery shrinks back into human scale. It left behind a handful of lessons that felt like warnings carved into a doorframe. Do not trust a text that sounds like theater. Do not mistake a loop of tread for a turnaround. Do not ignore a lock thrown the wrong way at 4 a.m. in the hills, where cold makes honesty of breath. Above all, do not assume that sand forgets. Sometimes it keeps just enough to remember you. By the morning of October 12, 2013, the search had become a vigil. The sandpit at the edge of the river lay quiet. Machinery sat cold. Wind combed the reeds. In that stillness, the case finally cracked. Wei Tongbin confessed. He led detectives step by step to the first impact site, to the place, a few hundred meters away, where he had thrown a phone and a SIM card, to a cemetery by a fresh grave where he had pitched a wooden stick, the makeshift weapon, and then to the rear of his in-laws' warehouse, where the soil was soft and the odor unmistakable. The body they uncovered, already far along in decomposition, was later confirmed by DNA as Neo Kwang Ho. The confession did not come from remorse. It came from pressure, physical evidence closing in, and a timeline that no longer bent. When technicians examined a small grain truck Wei often drove, they found a dark smear at the front edge of the driver's door, dried blood, not spatter, but a drag mark located at the hinge line that hides when the door is shut. Family reference samples matched the victim. That hinge line smear, protected when the door closed, had escaped any hurried cleanup and turned into the pivot of the case. The roadmap of the crime had been drawn even earlier. In the dirt, investigators documented a set of small truck tire impressions near the camp's 6 prominent grooves, a tread width of about 12 centimeters, a track width of roughly 142 centimeters. The entry path came from a mountain cleft, stopped a little over 20 meters from the shacks, about 65 feet, then turned and left the way it had come. That pattern was not a casual U-turn on a highway. The lane into the pit was a narrow, hidden strip of earth, about 200 meters, roughly 650 feet from the main road. A random driver would not choose that blind pocket to swing around. This truck came with purpose, link by link. The truck pointed home. Villagers knew Wei no longer managed the pit day to day. He hauled grain for his in-laws, using their small truck registered a year earlier. He denied access to such a vehicle. Records disproved him. The in-laws' plate pattern matched. The tread matched. 6 grooves, about 12 centimeters. The track matched. The lie frayed, and there was the night. On September 29th, after a birthday gathering, Wei and his wife left early. Later that same night, a neighbor couple recalled a late visit from their son-in-law. He came alone, close to 11 at night, asking to take the truck to move grain from the warehouse to the shop. The lane from that warehouse into the village was rough and unlit. No one ferried sacks at that hour unless they had something else to move, something that could not wait for daylight. Investigators drew the line straight in the dead of night. The truck left not with harvest, but with a body. Overlay the final text message, sent at 6:22 in the evening on October 1st. It read like a hasty alibi, dismissing a female colleague and announcing a sudden departure to make money. It asked partners to carry on without him. It sounded like a door closing, but not one the victim would have closed by text. The tone was off. The business was steady. The stakes were too high for a throwaway message. In retrospect, the message felt like a puppet string, pulled by someone who had already silenced its owner. Wei's account of why was a long grievance sharpened down to a single point. A year earlier, he and his wife had hired laborers and tried to mine sand on their own. The venture sputtered short of capital, behind on equipment, and without enough buyers. Then capital arrived. Neo Guanghua joined, contributed over half the funds, took majority control, and pulled the business into profit. Over time, according to Wei, power congealed around 3 people. Niet, a second major shareholder named Doi, and the bookkeeper, Zhang Xiao Kam. Wei said the numbers went opaque. He claimed he saw only verbal reports and a small percentage payout, lower than a bank deposit. While he watched trucks load and the river turn, he asked to pull his capital. He was told, in essence, to sell his slice to someone else, or wait until the riverbed ran dry and the company dissolved. What he heard was contempt. What he felt was extinction. Here the psychology mattered. Pride is not accounting to a man who believes the original idea was his, that he laid the first tracks in the sand. Being told sell out or wait can read like a public downgrading from founder to bystander. The mind looks for an exit, then for a correction, then for revenge. Over days, resentment ruminated. Opportunity shaped itself. On a holiday week, when workers thinned and a partner was away at a family party, the camp would be quiet. The lane would be dark. There would be time to enter and time to leave. Reconstructing the night does not take imagination. It takes geometry. After 8 in the evening, a villager had seen Neo walking back toward the pit. By 4 in the morning, a shareholder returning from overnight, Mahjong found Ni'iyu's door locked from the outside. Somewhere in that window, the small truck rolled in from the mountain cleft and stopped short of the shacks. A confrontation, a swing from a wooden stick, an object easy to find near a construction yard, easy to discard at a cemetery. Blood found its way to the door edge when a body brushed the metal during loading. With the door sealed, the smear hid. Then the road to the village, the rough lane, the unlit turn, the warehouse yard, the shovel. After the confession, detectives traced each waypoint that Wei had given. The cemetery yielded the stick. The field near the road offered the discarded phone hardware. Behind the warehouse, the ground opened. Forensic testing closed the loop. In the interview room, the words that followed were not an apology. They were a curse. Wei called the victim names and cast himself as the wronged party. He spoke of capital shares, unfair splits, and control of money, as if money could justify midnight. Yet cases like this are never only about profit and loss. They are about identity, who leads, who decides, who is seen. In small enterprises, transparency is oxygen. Opaque books, whispered side deals, and condescension are sparks on dry grass. None of that explains murder. It explains motive. The law explains the rest. There is no triumph in closing such a file, only a record. A riverbank pit, a lane of earth, a hinge line stain, a late-night truck, a message at 6:22, a fresh grave's flowers still bright. Each detail by itself said very little. Together, they spoke with one voice. And by October 12th, 14 days after the disappearance, that voice brought the missing man home and put the killer's story in order. By the end of Golden Week, the village had learned to whisper. People avoided the lane to the pit after dark. The reeds along the river sounded like someone breathing. In that hush, a new piece slid into place: resentment, measured not in days but in ledgers. Wei Tongbin had watched his stake shrink into a monthly share that felt lower than a bank deposit, and watched the books close their covers to him. He had once started this, or so he believed. Now he stood outside the circle he drew. That belief is a matchstick. A holiday night is tinder. On the birthday evening of the 29th, he drank. The quarrel at the party about salt, about pride, sent everyone to their separate corners. He walked his wife back to her parents' courtyard, left again when the house fell quiet, and set off alone toward the sandpits. In his telling later, another spark sat under the anger. A son's wedding loomed. Customs demanded gifts, and cash had to move. He sought the boss not to rip up capital, he said, but to borrow 20,000 yuan, about 70 million dong for 1 month. If he failed to repay, he would surrender the 80,000 he had once invested. The answer came back flat and cold. Rules are rules. No one loans from a common fund for private affairs. The door stayed shut. Something in him didn't. What happened next was simple in shape and fatal in consequence. He found Nieo by the shacks, a man alone at the edge of routine, and a wooden stick served as an argument made of wood and wrist. The first blow landed. Panic broke the rest. Niu ran, choosing open ground where sound goes nowhere. Wei followed, striking again and again until movement stopped on a wide skirt of sand. In the silence that arrived, a silence with weight, he was already thinking in verbs: fetch, drive, bury, erase. He ran to his in-laws' place with a reason that sounded like work. The lane between the warehouse and the village rose and fell, like a bad breath rutted, unlit. Not a road for honest midnight errands. He took the small grain truck and rolled it down through the mountain cleft toward the camp. Loading a body is not delicate. It is geometry and leverage. The blood that marked the driver's door was not a spray, but a drag hidden along the hinge line when the door closed, protected from a hurried wipe-down, waiting for daylight and lab work. In small cases, it is small things that refuse to be erased. Back at the warehouse, long after midnight, when old people sleep and neighbors stop hearing there was no sidewall to block him, he dug behind the storehouse where sacks once rested under the word grain. Soil gave, then sealed. He cleaned the truck, or thought he did, and the hinge kept it secret. The next day but one, at 6:22 in the evening on October 1st, a message left the dead man's phone. "I'm going away to make money. Don't trust that woman. You handle things." It read like a stage cue. Then the phone and SIM traveled a few hundred meters and flew into scrub. Theater always needs props. The smear in the message was not random. It jabbed at the bookkeeper. Zhang shall come, to seed suspicion between the two strongest survivors, Doi and Zhang, so that each would watch the other and neither would look at Wei. It also promised Wei a new leverage. Once the inner circle cracked, a man on the margins could press for numbers he had been denied. The mask of a text was more than a goodbye. It was a pry bar. But even good theater leaves footprints. Near the shacks, on ground that should have forgotten, lay a small truck tread with 6 ribs, a contact width near 12 centimeters, about 5 inches, and a track width near 142 centimeters. The loop told its own story. Enter from the ravine, idle within sight of sleeping roofs, turn in a tight arc, and leave by the same thin seam. If a driver only wanted a U-turn, the National Road, 200 meters away, about 650 feet, offered a bright and broad stage. This was purpose, not convenience. Villagers, who know machines like voices, named the likely trucks on one hand. The pit's routine moved bulk by heavy haulers. Small lorries had no business in recent weeks, and certainly not at night. The impression was fresh inside a 10-day window that matched the vanishing. A road can be peeled back with measurements. A lie can be peeled back with them, too. The timeline had already tightened like wire. A neighbor saw Neo walk past the primary schoolyard between 8 and 8:30. Head down, nod exchanged, feet set toward the pit. By a little after 4 in the morning, Doi returned from a long mahjong night to find the boss's room locked from the outside. Between those 2 points, the phone stayed dark. After a last answered call at 5:36 in the late afternoon of the 29th, when Zhang phoned to call him back for dinner, a man with that schedule did not choose to vanish. Someone else chose for him. Pressure made words. On October 12th, 14 days after the walk past the schoolyard, Wei stopped holding the fiction together. He showed the first impact site. He showed where he had tossed the phone hardware into brush a few hundred meters away. He pointed out the cemetery by a fresh grave, where he had thrown the wooden stick. And he walked them behind the in-laws' warehouse, where the dirt rang dull. The body's condition spoke of days, not hours. DNA closed the loop that tire iron and text had drawn. Motive wasn't mysterious. It was a long grievance cut to a point. Years earlier, Wei and his wife tried to mine on their own and sputtered short of capital, buyers, and steady machines. Then new money arrived. Neo and Doi pushed the pit into profit and took control. In Wei's story, 3 people now breathed the numbers, and he did not. He asked to pull out. The answer was to sell his slice to someone else, or wait until the sand ran dry and the company dissolved. Pride heard contempt, need heard no. That refusal, about 20,000 now, about 80,000, then became the blade. He swung later from the shadows. The law came last, as it always does. Regret came in the same room where he once cursed the dead man and called him names. He told officers and reporters that if they had only written a clear agreement at the start, but if the ledgers had been open, anger might not have found a stick. That is a version of remorse. It is also a confession that numbers had become identity. In May of 2014, on the 10th day, the first instance court pronounced a death sentence for intentional homicide. The river kept moving. The reeds kept combing the wind. The sand remembered what it could. Night falls quickly in a mountain village. By 9:30, shutters click. By 10, the lane to the pit is a darker river. This is where the story ended and where our lessons begin. The case is closed. The text at 6:22 p.m. Prot. On the 1st of October was theater. The hinge line smear on the truck's door was blood, and a fresh grave's flowers stood near a discarded stick. The rest is paperwork. But before we box it up, let's hold the evidence in our hands one last time and ask what it says about trust, money, and the small agreements we make with one another. The physical thread that wouldn't snap was that stain, not a spray. A drag hidden along the driver door hinge seam, invisible once the door shut, and missed in a hurried wipe down. Family reference samples tied it to the missing man. Small detail, big anchor. The ground spoke too, 20 plus meters from the shacks. Sand held a narrow small truck tread. 6 ribs, about 12 centimeters contact width, 142 centimeters track. The loop was unmistakable. Enter from the ravine, idle within sight of the rooms. Turn, leave the way it came. If you only wanted to swing around, you'd do it on the bright shoulder of the national road, 200 meters away. Purpose, not convenience. People filled in the gaps. A villager named Liu saw the boss pass the schoolyard around 8 to 8:30 and head toward the pit by a little after 4. The co-owner, who was usually on site, returned from Mahjong to find the boss's door locked from the outside. Between those points, no calls, no meetings, just a village that goes quiet after 10. At first, suspicion eddied toward the partner who was oddly absent. That one night, he's usually present. He had a birthday to attend. Tempers flared over salty dishes, and the party broke early. He left. So did another shareholder tied to a small grain truck, with a plate ending in 313. In small places, vehicles are like voices recognized by sound and number. It fit the lane. It fit the hour. Another story flickered, then went out. The accountant's house, the open door at dinner, the husband who came home for only 2 of 7 holiday days and then rushed back to Guangdong because of a verified workplace accident. Rumors tried to turn jealousy into motive. Verification turned them into noise. The last message: I'm going away to make money. Don't trust that woman, you decide, was the loudest mask in the room. Business was steady. No one with a majority stake resigns by SMS and slanders a colleague on the way out. When a text reads like a staged exit, look for the hand that needed it staged. By the 12th of October, the pressure of facts bent the timeline straight. The driver who denied having a truck pointed out the first strike site, the phone SIM dump a few hundred meters away, the stick at a cemetery by a fresh grave, and the burial behind his in-laws' warehouse. DNA and geometry did the rest. Why this happened is not a mystery. It's a ledger, sharpened into a blade. Years before, a couple tried to mine on their own and sputtered thin capital, dated machines. No buyers. New money arrived. The pit turned a profit. Control concentrated. One partner said the books went opaque and payouts felt lower than a bank deposit. He wanted out, or at least a bridge loan 20,000 yuan for a month, with the earlier 80,000 yuan stake as collateral if he defaulted. The answer was no. The common fund is not a private purse. Anger found a stick. That is the case. These are the lessons. In every cooperation, from a sand pit to a student flat, the same fuse runs through. Unclear. Money becomes personal, then moral, then violent. You don't need a quarry to see it. 2 roommates will do. One holds the grocery kitty, logs every purchase, then starts adding extras he alone enjoys, and later folds his girlfriend's dinners into the shared ledger, as if the other owes half. Peace lasts until the receipt does not. It ends in shouting, because ambiguity always grows teeth. So, for our channel, Unraveling Mysteries, here's the take-home we actually care about. Write it down. Capital shares, roles, payout rules, and veto rights ink first, handshake after. Opaque ledgers turn business arguments into identity wounds. Separate pools. Company cash is not wedding money. If you must borrow, do it by a documented loan, not by everyone understands. Boundaries keep friendships alive. Watch The Perfect Alibi. The only night the on-site partner was absent, the camp was thin for a holiday, and a small truck traced a purposeful loop. Patterns that are too neat aren't neat. they're arranged. Don't let texts decide truth. If a message grants away authority and smears a colleague, yet bypasses any meeting or call, treat it like a prop until proven otherwise. Small clues matter most. A hinge line stain, a 6-rib tread, a plate's last 3 digits. In stories like this, the details aren't details. They're the whole case. And one more. Rumors waste time. Verification saves it. The open-door dinner. The mother watching the courtyard. The husband's documented recall to work. Each cut a false branch from the tree. A man did not vanish between a meal and dawn. He was taken. The sand kept just enough to remember him. The lesson we keep is simpler still. To be honest with money. Or you will end up arguing, not about numbers, but about dignity, and stories like this begin.